2011 was a year and it had video games. And here are some I like these video games. Hello, everybody, and welcome to my Windows Movie Maker edition of 2011. Thank you. What a surprise it was that this game was decent. Like, I enjoyed playing it for more than an hour, which isn't something that had happened with 3D Sonic games since, like, Sonic Heroes, and even that one's a stretch, to be honest. And when I say 3D Sonic game, I mean 3D. I still see Sonic Adventure 2 as the epitome of Sonic gameplay in 3D, but for the new style they started in Sonic Unleashed, Generations is by far the best example in my opinion. The 2D segments of Generation are actually the weakest, I felt, believe it or not. They just feel slow and floaty, still having some of that weird Sonic the Hedgehog 4, I don't know, awfulness to the controls. Not nearly as bad as Sonic the Hedgehog 4, but still, I was surprised that I look forward way more to the modern Sonic version of levels than the classic ones. To be honest, there are a lot of games that you're going to see on the honorable mentions that I consider better games than Sonic Generations, but the feeling of enjoying my time with Sonic again was so good that I just had to include it on the list proper. The story wasn't in the way, which, okay, I'm not even that opposed to story in Sonic games, but let's say around this point I started to be. Though it did have a pretty good culmination at the end with the two Supersonics. Honestly, the end boss was pretty buggy and not fun, but still, I got a few goosebumps. It got the ickle Sonic boy in me excited. So yeah, Sonic Generations. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim is undeniable. Like, all the jokes of Todd, Howard, and Skyrim re-releases aside, there's a reason there are so many new versions and so many people that still play it to this day. It left an impression, to say the least. Now, a lot of its staying power is due to mods, that is also undeniable, but I want to mostly talk about the vanilla game. It's got issues, duh. I'm one of those Morrowind hipsters, so I've got plenty to say about Bethesda's dumbing down of RPG mechanics, lore, and all sorts of things they've lost along the way. But Skyrim does still have that core allure of the open world, of living for a bit in a world of fantasy. And for all the bugs and nonsensical things that those cause, it obviously still resonates. Skyrim defined Western RPGs for some people. It's like a blanket you've had since childhood. It's gotten a few holes in it, deflated a bit so it's not that warm anymore, but it just feels good to use some of the time. Like going home for fans of stupid swords and sorcery fantasy. I see Skyrim as the turn your brain off fantasy RPG, and it's still good at that to this day. And you can mod it so you can fuck all the characters. I mean, you can't go wrong there, I guess. I was so fucking excited for Marvel vs. Capcom 3, man. I was so excited for the re-release of 2. Playing the Dreamcast version of 2 and just unlocking this crazy number of characters was such a good time. Oh, I waited with bated breath for every character reveal trailer. Fighting games, for some reason, are the only kinds of games that I get legitimately gamer hyped for. I couldn't really become one of those streamers that react to every Nintendo Direct or whatever and scream, because I don't react like that normally. But seeing Wolverine in a fighting game where he probably wasn't going to be complete ass was fucking hype. Then the game finally came out and was pretty good with shitty netcode. But that's, Capcom fighting games. Well, most of them. There's one that was kind of shitty everywhere, but this is about games I like. And I liked Marvel vs. Capcom 3, both the vanilla and upgraded version. It was laser focused on recapturing the feeling of playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2. No, the feeling of thinking about playing it. Because, I mean, look, I love MVC2, but, well, my favorite Marvel character is Wolverine, and it was tough. It was tough liking Wolverine and playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2. My main team in MVC2 was Venom, Blackheart, and Thanos, by the way, so it's not like I'm not up for some uphill battles, but come on. Now, the balance in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was still very much fucky. Very fucky. But it's hard to even compare the two rosters in terms of how fleshed out the characters are. Wolverine was pretty OP, which was cool. But above the issues of balance, the game was just fun to play. It was fast, combos were absurd, and felt really good to do. There was so much dirty, unfair shit you could do to your friends. If it had playable netcode, in fact, if I remember correctly, it was hard to even get into a match for months after the game's launch because of a menu bug, this would be higher on the list. But as a game in a vacuum, MVC3 was kind of a miracle, coming out when it did and being as good as it was, especially considering how Marvel was before it came out and after it came out. The Warhammer franchise is so ripe with settings for awesome video games, why the fuck aren't there more? It's just a bunch of cool fantasy and sci-fi shit flung together where everyone's fighting and there are Lovecraftian demons everywhere and giant fanatical mutant men with chainsaws. Why are all the games made by developers who mostly made portable ports of sports games or some shit? I don't get it. Well, this one wasn't, and this one is pretty freaking cool. The number one thing this game does really well, and like 90% of the reason it's on this list, is make you feel like a space marine. You're a heavy fucking slab of man meat and metal that only exists to fight space aliens. I was hooked to this game, honestly, on the first step I took. I don't know how they did it, but they got the feeling of controlling a space marine perfect. Exactly how it should be. Just the right amount of weight behind your movements, the right sound of your footsteps. At the same time, a lumbering door that shoots bullets, and a frighteningly quick and brutal melee warrior. Now, it's not the perfect game. The story is alright. I know some people were upset they went with Ultramarines, but it wasn't fucking Blood Ravens again, so I'm good with that. There's a lot of filler. Enemies get pretty bullet spongy near the end when melee is basically impossible against them. But the fact that we haven't gotten a good action-based Warhammer game since this one is a travesty. Maybe that Diablo clone one that's in early access is good, I don't know. But they need to do a Space Marine 2. And not really because this one ended on a cliffhanger. Like I said, I don't really care about the story, just because it could be so good with another go-around to tighten things up. I mean, it had to be somewhere, right? It took me forever to actually like Dark Souls. It really did. But once I really put myself into it, really wanted to see what everyone else saw, I still didn't really like it all that much. Then I played some more, and yeah, it's good. I'm gonna say something that might make you angry, but the original Dark Souls is actually my least favorite of the Soulsborne line of games. I'm not gonna tell you my most favorite here, because it'll most likely make you even more mad at me, but if you were expecting this to be higher, even number one, I'm sorry, but it's just not there for me. That said, there is a lot to appreciate about Dark Souls, and I'm sure you've heard it about 1,000 times already. I love the way it tells stories, the old school approach to game design of letting the player figure out things on their own, of showing instead of telling. I love how it wasn't afraid to let things actually be secretive. On my first playthrough, I didn't even know half of the game existed. Dark Souls good. This is a video game video of a gamer man telling you Dark Souls good. The Witcher 2 is a strange video game. The original Witcher is one of my favorite games of all time, despite the much lower budget of its sequels and how jank it can be. It was very much an older PC game in that jank, but out comes Witcher 2, and it's better written, voice acted, and choreographed than any BioWare game ever made, in my opinion. Now, it's worth mentioning that The Witcher 2 was a very different game on release than it is now. It took me about an hour to get past the first fight on launch, give or take. It was strangely balanced, let's say. But I got through it, and what I was rewarded with was, at the time, one of the most surprisingly enthralling fantasy games out there. Geralt, while he definitely had a certain charm to him in the first game, really came into his own in this game as the stoic Batman-type character that could at times be strikingly sensitive. It was kind of a shame, in my opinion, that Trish didn't receive equal treatment in that regard, but I realize that's an opinion. She's not the main character anyway, and it was here where we really felt like I could connect with Geralt. The Witcher 2 was a big, ambitious gamble, and I feel one that paid off. It was the game that I think ultimately let CD Projekt Red get to where it is now. Again, flawed, especially in its gameplay, but it's a game I'll always remember. Arkham combat is kind of a derisive term nowadays for flashy but simplistic combat that usually involves easy yet powerful counters and mashy offense. But you know what? When you're Batman, it should be easy to beat the fuck out of people. People go back and forth on what game is the best in the Arkham series between City and Asylum. Honestly, I do prefer the Metroidvania style of Asylum over the open world, go to places on the map styles of City, but I still very much enjoy City, and it came out this year and Asylum didn't, so that is how this happened, and that's why this video is the way it is. It's the passage of time. Time comes for all of us, if not our bodies, then our minds. In a sea of open-world, third-person action games, Arkham City still stands out, and not just because you get to be Batman in it, though honestly that is a big part of it for me. The Arkham games just got Batman, at least my idea of Batman. They focus mostly, of course, on the ninja crime fighter aspect, but they also make sure to keep in mind that the Batish Man is also a detective. Now, most of this comes in the form of the now ubiquitous game-o-vision that Asylum kind of pioneered, but you got the riddles all over the city. Some of them are pretty tricky too. I just like feeling like Batman, is what I'm saying. And Arkham City is debatedly the most Batman feeling of all video games. The Yakuza series has become near and dear to my heart, at the same time dramatic, emotional, and bizarre and hilarious. A lot of people have gotten into the game thanks to Yakuza 0, as the memes flooding the internet can attest. I love that game. I love most every Yakuza game, but 4 had something special to it, I think. It was the first time we really stepped outside of Kiryu's shoes, and honestly, I think Kiryu is the most powerful protagonist in Yakuza, and got to experience Kamurocho and other locations from a different perspective. Okay, now, I love Kiryu, despite my little fake under my breath thing I did before, and the way he interacts with Sejima in this game is a big reason for it. Sejima was the most interesting character to play as for me. It was the first time I felt like I was playing an actual criminal, heart of gold as he may have, and not the superhero anime character that Kiryu can sometimes be. Akiyama is the most beautiful man ever molded on a computer, but unraveling his story was also interesting. Then there's Tanamura. I guess what I'm saying, okay. Tanamura is better than the first part of his story would have you believe. Don't want to spoil a lot, but he was also, in my opinion, the funnest character to play as in battle with his unique style. So there's that, at least. But I guess what I'm saying is 4 is probably my favorite Yakuza game, so it gets on the list. Oh, Gavi, you had Marvel vs. Capcom 3 lower on the list because of its bad netcode, but Mortal Kombat 9 has the worst netcode ever. Hey, you're absolutely right. It was the worst netcode ever, but it's my list, and I really like Mortal Kombat 9. MK9 was everything it needed to be, except for the aforementioned and truly awful netcode that might as well not have even been there. Keep in mind, the MK game before this was MK vs. DC, which, while I like that game more than I'm willing to admit, was about as far from Mortal Kombat as Mortal Kombat has ever gone, and I'm including the Saturday morning cartoon show. MK9 came out and it was 2D again. It had most of the iconic characters from the 2D era. It was bloody, had secrets, the crypt. For a Mortal Kombat fanboy, it was truly the highest point of the series, in my opinion. The reason it's so high on the list is really because of that. I grew up playing Mortal Kombat on my little Sega Genesis with my daddy, so despite the series being incredibly violent and gore-filled, it actually fills me with a lot of comforting feelings. Brings me back to my childhood to see Sub-Zero rip someone's spine out, you know? If MKX in 11 had continued the direction this one took, I might not think that highly on it. But while I like both of those games, I think it's hard to argue that the series didn't pivot from its roots in terms of atmosphere and characters after 9. So, as broken as it is, MK9 still feels like home, and that's why it's here. There were a lot more honorable mentions this year, so we're gonna go through them really fast. Portal 2 was good, and I don't really need to explain why. Terraria was Minecraft, but with more of a focus on combat and neat toys to play with, and it was really fun in multiplayer. It is a good game. I love planning shit in games, and that's all Frozen Synapse was, so it was really fun. Bastion, again, not a lot of explanation needed. Good voice, good game. Go, yay. Now, this is one that could have easily been on the list proper. Honestly, if I had just played it again, maybe it might be up there, but ultimately, I didn't like a lot of the direction this game took the series, though I guess Invisible War started that, so whatever. Very good game, despite not making it on the list. A lot of what makes LA Noire good, in my opinion, is the novelty, the faces as weird as they sometimes look, and the detective shit you do. The actual story ends up forgettable for a lot of people, I feel, though I liked it more than I thought it would. Alright, everyone knows Skyward Sword is flawed, but if I'm being honest, it has my favorite Link and Zelda, the characters, of any Zelda game. They have more personality than in other games, and you can tell they want to hold hands so damn bad. King of Fighters 12 and 13 look gorgeous, probably the best looking fighting games ever made in my opinion. But the netcode sucked, and it didn't have Blueberry, so it didn't make the list. Final Fantasy Tactics is one of the best games ever made, and thus so is War of the Lions. I actually prefer War of the Lions' translation. I know that might be controversial, but I'm a sucker for that kind of old English dialect, and I thought it actually brought out more of the characters. The reasons it isn't on this list is because 1, I already played Final Fantasy Tactics, and 2, the god-awful lag on the PSP when you used spells and abilities. If you think it should be on the list, though, because tactics games are great, well, let's get to number 1. The Ogre Battle / Tactics Ogre series is really the origin of the tactical JRPG that most associate Final Fantasy Tactics with, one that is woefully underrepresented. To put it into perspective, the last game in the franchise we've received was this game, 10 years ago, and it's a remake of the second game in the series. Let Us Cling Together is really the blueprint for this kind of game and this kind of story in the medium, and the remake on the PSP is an excellent introduction to the series. Tactics Ogre resonates so much with me, I feel, because it's the kind of game I would make. A turn-based tactical RPG where you can customize your units, with a mature plot of intricate political schemes and world events affecting the more personal story of the player themselves. The PSP remake tells that story the way it was meant to be, I feel, and it brings with it a load of balance changes and quality of life enhancements that greatly better the experience. If you're one of those many people who rightly love Final Fantasy Tactics and wonder why Square hasn't made another game in the exact vein since, I implore you to check out Let Us Cling Together. It runs great on the PSP that you legally have in your computer right now, wired directly into the mainframe, legally. There's no excuse, well, other than time. It is a long game, as it honestly should be. It's difficult to fully explain how many of my buttons Tactics Ogre presses. It gets my fucking ass wet, let's just say that. If this was a top 10 list of games released all decade, I can almost assure you this one would be on it. But we'll get to that later. For now, check out Let Us Cling Together if you haven't already, and look forward to 2012. Hopefully sooner than 7 months has it been? I gotta get to work on videos, man. COVID got me slacking.